everybody. Welcome back to the RFL League podcast show. It is episode 3. We are midway through the draft, and of course we said we'd be back after the new year to talk through some of the antics that have happened during this draft so far. And it's all joining me today is Wobbegong. Wobbegong, thank you for coming back. Draft, we talked about how crazy it was. It kind of lived up to expectations, I think.
It definitely did. So first of all, Happy New Year. The draft was crazy, a lot of trades. If you look at the first 11 picks, a lot of trades happened, a lot of really good players in this draft. So it was exciting to see how the first round and also the other rounds happened, which players were available, and what strategies team took to navigate throughout the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think today's episode, we're going to be talking about probably some of the top end of the draft, some of the teams that have sent in some great messages for us in terms of updates about their team, what their thoughts were. And of course, we're going to be trying to break down some of our best picks and least favourite picks in the first 3 rounds. Well, I mean, Wobbegong, we can't start anywhere. We have to start with the top of the draft. And before we dive into, well, what on earth happened, basically, I just need to give a shout out to Rasp, the commissioner. Thank you very much for hooking me up with the league photos and the player pictures. As you can see on the screen, Dan Marino did go number 1. The Washington Redskins did have the number 1 pick, but they ended up trading it to the Miami Dolphins, who, to be frank, I don't know whether describing chucking a grenade into the first round of the draft is probably adequate. They probably fired a missile or something to get what they wanted in the end. And, well, I mean, let's go in and have a little look at it, shall we, Wobbegong? I mean, wow, it was absolute madness. We knew that the Dolphins were going to try and do everything in their capabilities to try and draft Dan Marino. But, I mean, wow, they kind of completed that transaction and then kind of went down the first round picking exactly who they wanted and throwing picks around everywhere. I mean, just to give everyone a sense of really what happened before we open up for you to get a view of Wobbegong, I think just to give everyone a view, the Dolphins traded a total of 30 picks in this draft to land, the following players, really. Dan Marino, who was quarterback, who went number 1. Eric Dixon, who went 4th. Richard Dent, who went 6th. And Mark Clayton, who went 11th. So, I mean, absolute chaos. Let's get your initial reaction, Wobbegong, before we go over to the Miami press conference from Soa and get his view on what he's been looking at and what he's been doing this offseason to kind of make this draft happen.
Yeah, just incredible navigating through the draft. In my opinion, it's a lot of picks to give up for the players. But on the other hand, he had, I guess, 25 picks to start the draft with. You just cannot take 25 selections with the roster size we have in this league. So we all knew that trades are going to happen, and he did a really great job over the last couple of seasons to get the draft picks, to get into the position he was at the beginning of this draft, to be able to trade to number 1 overall. Of course, it's a big price, but I think he did a great job. When you look at the roster, he got perfect quarterback, star running back, star edge rusher, and also a good weapon on wide receiver. He had 4 picks in the top 11, so he did a good job of trading, and that's definitely something he's really, really good at, doing a lot of trades. And I think it paid off to some degree, really great players, and I'm excited to see where this team is going to be next season.
Yeah, let's dive over to Soa and get his reaction from the draft and bringing in Dan Marino to the Miami Dolphins.
To answer a few questions, the plot to bring Marino to Miami has actually been in the works for a number of seasons. Actually, since the first season, I always had a plan to bring as many Dolphins to the team as I can. And Marino was a big name who I planned on for many seasons. I knew that I had to get a bunch of draft capital and stockpile it and use that to catapult myself from whatever position in draft I was at all the way up to get Marino. And I did. And I wasn't shy about who I wanted and wasn't shy about giving up enough capital to get him. That was always the plan. It was always Marino. And he was always coming to Miami no matter what it took. And it took a lot of picks. And I got him here, and he's going to be here till he retires. And then I went ahead and got me a running back, Dickerson. I did think about grabbing the guard there, but opted for the running back because I needed one, and I felt that he was the best running back on the board and the best running back out of the draft. And then I went ahead and solidified my defensive end position with a really good one. I think he's the best of the draft. And Dent, he should be around for years. I traded a lot to move up to both picks, the fourth pick and the sixth pick. I traded a lot to get up to there, spent a lot of picks. On Dickerson alone, spent over 2 first-round picks, second, couple of thirds, and some players. And Dent took a lot of to get Dent. It took a lot to get Dent, and it took a lot to bring Clayton here as well. But at least Marino has one of his targets, one of the Mark brothers to throw to, and Clayton. So I'm hoping that to be able to surround Marino with some good players at running back, receiver. I'm hoping that will help catapult his stats along with the team into the first place and ultimately playoffs. But I still have ways to go. I have to get solidified more positions. Offensive line, I need to get younger there. I plan on it. But having Marino there, that's key. That's the first step. Marino, and then build around him as much as I can. So, I mean, bringing Marino here just sets the tone for what I want to do. I had a shitload of picks. I was able to use those picks and for my capital and get who I wanted to get, and I was able to do it. I have a few other players I'd like to get. Everybody knows I was trying to get Duper, and I wanted to get Duper, but getting who I got in the draft, I wasn't able to get Duper. It's not going to shut the door on that. I do plan on acquiring him at some point. Just a little harder now. But I think this team is in good position right now. We have a few picks left in the draft to help with some other positions, but we will do our best to bring more Dolphin players to Miami and build on what we have and get back to the playoffs and back to the Super Bowl. It might take a little bit of time, but that's the plan, and we're looking forward to the future. And I'm sure you'll see Miami doing better this year than last year. Last year sucked, but this current season should be a lot better than last, and the future should hold a lot of good things for Miami.
So some really interesting thoughts there from Sarah in terms of how he made the deals, who he wanted to acquire, and well, I mean, I think the interesting thing for me, Wobbegong, is how long in the making it has to bring Mr. Dan Marino to the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, it's awesome to see. If you join this league from the beginning, you know that this draft is gonna be in 7 seasons or 8 seasons from the beginning. So it's nice that you already had a target from the beginning and stuck to his plan. Sort of getting the draft capital. He won a Super Bowl once, so he was successful in the past. But after that, using his great roster to rather get draft picks to be in position for Dan Marino. I like that. People are just giving a lot to get their players they really wanted. In the end, it's what this league is about, seeing the players again that played in the 80s. And if that's something you want or someone you want to have on your team, there is no reason against doing it. So, of course, it cost a lot, especially in the trade from 3 to 1. He gave up 3, 8, and a future first-round pick, in addition to multiple second and third rounders. So it was a heavy price to pay. But if you get your favorite player, that's always worth it. So I love the strategy, and I like to see Dan Marino back, and also with Mark Clayton as a full weapon on one wide receiver. That's going to be a good duo next season.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I guess your initial thoughts. I mean, Dan Marino, unbelievable racing is coming in straight away. Just to give everyone a sense, he's 97 arm, 85 intelligence, 92 accuracy, good agility and strength, and he's already sort of full in his position skill. But the other interesting things to note is that he is also a gunslinger, a clutch QB, and of course he has the first overall pick tag as well. So he's going to be coming in pretty hot off of the training camp, I would imagine. You absolutely got it spot on, I think, Wobbegong, in the sense that Mark Clayton is going to be a really good offensive weapon. He's a possession wide receiver. He's in 80-80-80 pretty much by the end of training camp. I'd expect him to be there. So, Marino is going to have someone to throw to, which is always good. But let's talk a little bit quickly about Richard Dent, who the Miami sort of acquired with pick 6. I mean, didn't also think about one side of the ball, also focused on sort of bringing in defensive capability as well. And Richard Dent's probably the best edge in the class, isn't he?
He is for sure, especially I think in terms of run stopping. He has an awesome tackling rating with 73. He has awesome strength, 79. I think that's the highest in the class. Plus the speed rusher tag, so he should also be good in speed rushing. 73 speed is good as well. So he's the best edge in the class, also the first edge taken. I think he's a really good force for the Miami defense. And anyone who listened to our very first podcast where I talked about my strategy to build up the Buffalo Bills, one of the key pieces was Mark Gastineau, one of the best edge rushers in our league. And I think the Miami Dolphins just found themselves one of the future best edge rushers of the league. So he's an awesome pick. I like that. So I did not only go offense. 3 of those picks have been offense, getting running back, quarterback, and wide receiver, but also 1 pick on defense. I think that's very important to not forget about this. An edge rusher, in my opinion, is the pick to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I guess before we turn over and talk a bit about the other side of the frantic trading at the top in the Washington Redskins, with Miami now, where do you kind of see them positioned as we come out of this draft? I know, obviously, we've got a few rounds left, but do you kind of see them back up on top now, or is it a case of this is the first big step and then there's probably another couple of steps to kind of get back up to being that contender and Super Bowl winner, or do you think they're already there with this draft?
I think they are already there. I'm not sure how good rookies perform. Sometimes I have the feeling that although rookies with high overalls are good, that there's kind of the rookie uncertainty or maybe problems in some games. At least I noticed that for some of my rookies. I don't know if it's true, but nevertheless, I think they should be up there for one of the favorites for the division title. We have a very tough division, and honestly, everyone out of our 5 teams could win the division, and I wouldn't be too much surprised. So Miami Dolphins are one of the favorites right now. They have an awesome quarterback, awesome weapons, and they had a good roster before. Of course, not the best quarterback because that was their goal to get it. But with the additions adding to an already decent roster, I think they should definitely be in one of the contenders for the Super Bowl next season.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're drafting someone like Dan Marino and you're adding talent around him within the top 10 of the draft in what is probably going to be one of the most historic drafts in the RFL for a long time, they're going to be up there, right? That's going to be just a given, I think. But let's talk about the other side of the trade, which was, of course, was the Washington Redskins. They, to be frank, they had a really interesting move. They moved down from 1. They made some really interesting drafts and sort of transactions throughout this. I mean, they received a huge haul from Miami to kind of move down from 1 sort of all the way down there to the sort of 3 pick. Probably historic in terms of volume moved. I mean, Giants GM aside, he's probably going to be shouting at me saying that that's maybe not the case, but I think it was a big haul. And before we kind of talk about the Redskins and our views on it, Curtains from the Redskins has been kind enough to kind of send us a text, press text in terms of his view. So I'm just going to read that out for the audience, and we'll put it on the screen as well so you can kind of see it. But I mean, to give you a summary of what he kind of said. But it's essentially, wow, what a crazy week it has been. It all started a couple of weeks ago when he received an email from Soa wanting number 1 pick. At the time, he wasn't ready to move it. He was waiting for the draft combine results, but he kept thinking and brought it up to the other coaches to get their response to the first offer. And well, the first offer was, I mean, it was a huge haul anyway. I mean, we're talking about number 3, number 19, a bunch of seconds, a 5th, 6th, and a future first round pick, a future couple of third round picks, and a second round pick, which is a big enough haul anyway. It essentially, he says here, it was a good offer, but how can you pass on Elway? So it was clear the Redskins were going to take Elway at number 1 at this stage, as he, they felt he would turn the French franchise around. But there were also 2 other great quarterbacks, which was obviously Dan Marino and Kelly, and getting more picks would certainly help the Redskins to kind of rebuild. That's when the 19 overall pick kind of came into play. So, what Cohen essentially says that he knew that he owned a number 8 pick to do this trade, and he needed to get another franchise piece to maybe downgrade for that pick. So he took a strong look at Darrell Green from Texas A&M and how he could get that guy, and we'll obviously talk about him as well. That was a fantastic cornerback in the draft. So when the 8 pick came up, it was a chance worth taking. After all the interviews and combines, they were all done, and it was go time. The Redskins were about to make the pick for Elway, but the gut of Curtains told him to email Soa one more time, changing the offer to tell him he needed an 8 pick as well to move that number 1 pick. And after going back and forth a couple of times, that's how they agreed to it. The Redskins did also try and move up to the 2nd pick to get Elway, but that was a discussion with myself, and I did want quite a nice haul for that, obviously, given the huge haul that he received for number 1. So obviously that didn't materialise, which didn't make sense. So he's happy to take Kelly at number 3 and then get Green at number 8. And then at 28, he obviously spoke to the Kansas GM Jackson and managed to get Dwight Hicks for that pick, which was a fantastic pickup. Can't happen till week 2, I think, of the season. And then he looked good. And 27 was tempting, but the player he wanted was gone. He wanted Nate Newton. So he had seen a young guard in McKnight. So he made enough for him. It worked out. He could move it. And then essentially trading away Banlinger when he was young was only one dimension in blocking, whereas McKnight as a dual threat blocker at 23. So that kind of worked out quite nicely for them. So in the grand scheme of things, the Redskins managed to bring in Jim Kelly, Darrell Green in the draft, Dennis McKnight and Dwight Hicks. So some really, really talented players coming over to the Redskins. Wobbegong, there's a lot to unpack there. Not only just the trades, but also the things that did materialise, could have happened. Really, really useful insights from Curtains as to the other half of this mega blockbuster set of transactions.
Yeah, good dealing from his end. I like that he got the 8th overall pick. Jim Kelly was, as expected, the 3rd best quarterback. 91 overall is still awesome. So he comes in with 89 arm, 84 intelligence, 90 accuracy, and also a gunslinger trait. So he will be really, really good. And for him, getting a cornerback at number 8, by far the best corner in this draft, Darrell Green, I think that's definitely something that made it worth the pick. So good choice on his end to insist on getting the 8th overall pick, also back in return to get a really good cornerback. Also in this division, you have the Cowboys, you have the Eagles, you have the Cardinals with Joe Montana. Also, the Giants are a really, really good team. They did not play like that last season, but if you look at their 6 first-round rookies 2 years ago, it's a really tough division. And getting an 87 overall cornerback with elite agility and speed, plus the shutdown corner trade, I think that's a perfect choice. And also getting another star secondary player by trading a first-round pick with the Chiefs, I think that's also a good deal for him. So also in this division, I'm not sure who's going to win it. Washington is the team that improved by far the most in this division. So it will be very exciting to see where the Redskins will be next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the talent shift in the Redskins has gone up a completely different level with the draft. I really like Kelly. Kelly was someone that I looked at and would have been quite happy taking him. Absolutely, I think he could have easily been an number 1 pick, right, in any other draft. So to land him at 3 whilst getting a huge haul and for moving down 2 places from number 1 is a fantastic move from the Redskins' perspective. Of course, we talk about drafting your favourite players, Marino to the Dolphins and all of that, but I think Jim Kelly's just going to be just as good as Marino, and it's now going to come down to really seeing how he performs with that Redskins roster and what Curtains can kind of do with him. So I think the Redskins are made a fantastic offseason, had a fantastic draft. I really like the Hicks move. He was very much in high demand in free agency, so to try and land him early was a bit of a lucky swoop in my opinion. So I think they're going to be in a really good shape once they get to sort of week 2, week 3, and he comes in and there's some decent talent on this team as well. Let's not forget that it's still the likes of Jarvis they brought in. They've improved some of their back situation. I think there are still some gaps they'll need to address in terms of the defensive side of the ball, but I like the offensive line. I like the running back situation. I like the receiving core they've got. So I think they could be a bit of a dark horse this year in terms of getting back into the playoffs. So most certainly. Any final thoughts while we're going on the Redskins before we talk about a couple of other teams?
Yeah, if I had to rank the winners of this draft, Washington would be my number 2. And that brings us, I think, to my number 1 team that I think that's the winner of the draft. And that brings me to you, the Baltimore Colts. So maybe you can share a little bit about your strategy. We already started to talk about the top 3 quarterbacks in the draft. You, of course, drafted John Elway and also had 2 additional awesome first rounders. So take us a little bit through your strategy and how you navigated through the first round of this draft.
Sure. So I think going into the draft after the combine scouting, so we had discussions with Miami about moving pick 2 to pick 3, because there was a view, like the Redskins did obviously share and Curtis share. We thought the Redskins would take Elway based on the scouting. My opinion is I think that Elway was the best quarterback in the draft. I think he's better than Marino. But obviously that didn't materialise in terms of the offer and sort of the move, because Miami had gone and pivoted and essentially knocked up the number 1 pick. So we're then in an interesting sort of situation when that number 1 pick happened. I'm not even joking with this. As soon as the number 1 pick happened, I received about 15 different messages from 15 different GMs in the league. It's the most I've ever received from anyone in this league for offers for number 2 pick. Some of them were absolutely atrocious offers. Some of them could have worked out. But it was everything ranging from we were being offered elite prime players at the quarterback position plus first round picks to a silly number of draft picks basically, but they probably weren't as valuable as maybe what Miami had on offer for the first round pick. And then obviously we had the Washington discussion with Curtains about moving from 2 to 3 and doing a bit of a flip there. But as he said, I did have a high demand in terms of what I wanted for this pick, because I think Elway is in my opinion the best quarterback in the draft. So to move down to even from 2 to 3 to get Kelly was something that would require, in my opinion, a bit of a high value for it. I think personally, I think John Elway is probably going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league for a long time. So that's kind of what happened there. So we kind of reviewed it, had a look at the offers. It took a bit of time to kind of work through that, as you can imagine, the number of messages you're getting back and forth. Resulted in actually, you kind of can't turn away the opportunity to get someone like John Elway, I think. And whether that is, getting picks further down the road is always fantastic, but one of the fun things about a multiplayer league is like the opportunity to get, like, I reference it to basketball, getting like the Michael Jordan, or if you were to get like the Tom Brady or someone like that, right, in terms of modern NFL. John Elway is one of the stand-up amazing quarterbacks that everyone remembers, right, alongside the Mourinhos and so on. So that's why we kind of end up staying with number 2. Really interested to see how John Elway performs, to be honest with you. I think his speed thing is going to be really fascinating to play with. He is obviously a dual threat quarterback. Going into Draft Day Sports 25, it's going to be fun to see how some of that stuff plays out. He's a gunslinger as well in his clutch. So I'm interested to see that. I mean, And then sort of talking very quickly about some of the other things that happened. I did, as I mentioned to you before we came onto this, I did really, really like Carl Mecklenburg, and I thought he would drop down to the mid-first round, and I thought he would be a fantastic addition to us because, we've got Harry Carson who's getting on a bit, and I need a replacement for him eventually, and I didn't think I'd ever be able to get anywhere near someone of that ability ever again. Unfortunately, he got drafted at number 9, which was higher than I'd anticipated, and we couldn't get anything done in sort of that set of draft picks really. At 14, obviously, we managed to get Chris Hinton, who I really like as a tackle. We kind of shore up one of the sort of positions that I needed some depth on. Before sort of bringing in sort of a, probably not a Mecklenburg level of linebacker certainly, but one that I really like and I'm really interested to see how he performs is Darryl Talley. I like his sort of general overall sort of, he's what I call like a bit of a jack of all trades sort of linebacker who we kind of plug in any situation, I think. So I'm excited to see how he does, and hopefully him and Carson together will really beef up that line for us. And then that's pretty much how my first round went. I think we obviously traded back in to sort of get some of those, really the actual chaos for me from the draft was that second pick, and just dealing with just I've never seen anything like it, to be honest with you. The sheer volume of messages I got was just, it took me probably a good solid hour or two kind of at least work through some of that, to be perfectly honest with you.
It's crazy, but in the end, I think John Elway should be the best player out of this draft. I'm really interested to see how you're going to use him next season. I think he's a really, really good quarterback. Of course, his speed was unexpectedly very, very high at 95. I think that's something we have not yet seen in this league. He's faster than any of the wide receivers we have in the league, faster than lots or most of running backs. Not sure, maybe he's in the top 3 or top 4 in terms of speed in this league. So it will be a very interesting weapon you have there. But other teams, of course, wanted to have that as well. So very interesting to hear that about 15 other teams contacted you to trade up to number 2. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I mean, it was 15. I'd say probably in reality, 5 of them were pretty useless offers in the sense of the teams never had the value to kind of meet. There was probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 that kind of were interesting to have a quick chat about, and then it was a very quick no. And then there's probably the remaining, that makes that sort of 4 teams that were kind of viable options, and then it really came down to sort of 2 teams, and one of them was Washington, and then it was actually, on reflection, I've got to draft Elway basically. He's fallen on my lap up too. I've got to take him. So that's kind of how we ended up. But yeah, let's talk about some other teams. Thank you very much. I think we should say to begin with is that we did obviously reach out to the league and ask for guys to sort of send in their text or comments or anything that they wanted to share with us. And thank you so much for doing that. It's fantastic and really, really great to see that you're engaging with the podcast, even though we're on sort of only episode 3. Let's talk about a couple of these. We've got 3 teams who did reach out to us. So first of all, let's start with Jackson, who is one of the new GMs in the league at the Kansas City Chiefs. And I'll just give you a quick sort of overview of kind of where he was. Obviously, we mentioned that he moved Hicks to the Redskins in the future for some draft picks and kind of get his sense on his take on the draft so far. So he essentially said to us that after a dismal season, the Chiefs needed to focus on upgrading the line on both sides of the ball. Despite not controlling their only first-round pick, he was blown away by the scouting and efforts of the University of Hawaii during the pre-draft workouts and needed to get into the first draft to get the excellent tackle Mark Tooney. So during the time in Hawaii, we were also blown away by Tooney's teammates alongside the O-line and made it a point that his teammates were the next picks we had. They were able to get Tooney's tackle partner in Jim Mills, who's 6'9", and imposing presence, and the Chiefs have been lacking. With the pick, they had their eyes set on the final teammate from the O-line of Hawaii, which was Jesse Sapolu. I'm probably absolutely butchering that name. Unfortunately, the Dastardly Chargers took him from picks before, and they had to pivot to the defensive side of the ball with Tim Crumry, who is a beefy defensive tackle that brings strength and a mean streak to the defensive line that's sorely needed. Going forward in the draft, they were looking at best players available at positions of need. which led to the 3rd round pick of John Rad. And the Boy State Star had a 1st round grade, so we were surprised he fell to the 3rd round. And so they're ecstatic to bring him into the Kansas City Chiefs. And we're looking forward to seeing who's available as the draft keeps picks coming in. But I think they've hit a home run in the draft so far. So Kansas City, where do you think they've ended up in the draft so far? Obviously focused a lot on a particular college, it looks like, and then sort of been trying to pick up the best players available. And obviously Jackson is very happy with how things have panned out. What's your reflections on that, Wobbegong?
I think Mark Tooney is a good 1st round pick, and also taking a tackle. And you have to imagine, when you look at the Chiefs roster, they could use certain positions. They had a big free agency, added a lot of players there, but it's not like the Chiefs were the most successful team in the league over the last few years. They had their ups and downs, mainly downs. So I think it's really interesting to see what they would do in their very first draft, and trading your free safety, free agency edition in Hicks to get a tackle. I think that's an interesting idea. Tooney is, of course, a younger player, and building up the offensive line. I mean, you know me, that's always something I like. That's a good idea. So Mark Tooney was a good 1st pick. We're going to talk about the 2nd round pick later, but other than that, also getting a defensive tackle. I think there might be better players also on the board, but he will be an instant starter right away, and also I think a good player on defense. It was flashy to some degree that there has been a 1st round trade, but I like that they did not pay house money and drafted everything away they had for the next few years or something like that. So if you look at next year, they still have their 1st round pick, and I think that's really important for the Chiefs. In the past, they did not always have their 1st round pick, so I like the new thinking of the new owner, seeing where the Chiefs will be next season, and then maybe using next year's draft pick for more additions. I think this team is maybe 1 or 2 seasons away from being also good for us in this division. Maybe they surprise us, but drafting a tackle is always a good choice, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, thank you so much for sending in the text to kind of give us a summary of what you thought and where you were. It's always great to get views and opinions of why teams are making moves and give us that little bit of insight. But yeah, I mean, I think we could talk a little bit about the tackle sort of bringing in. I think Tooney's going to be fine. I think he's going to be a very solid tackle. No denying that. He is a 1st round talent, so I think he's going to develop quite nicely. I'm not sure, if I'm being honest, about Jim Mills, and we'll talk about him a bit later, but I really like the Crumry pick up in sort of the 2nd round as well, and we're probably not going to talk about him a little bit later, but I quite liked that acquisition, really. I think he's going to be a solid tackle, defensive tackle. He's not going to be anything special in terms of he's not like this amazing defensive tackle who's got everything, but he's got enough speed, tackling ability, strength to kind of be a solid starter, certainly for a long time in this league. So I think that's a good point, and I think I'll end up with sort of just saying that for teams like any team, not just Kansas City, but I think what's great is that going with what it is you want to try and get out of it. So if you are focusing on certain areas to improve, and you focus on those and you improve them, that's always a good starting point, because as everyone knows, Kansas is starting from quite a low point in terms of the beginning of this off-season. No GM, made a bunch of free agency signings just to get some depth on the board. Now they've got a GM. He's starting to try and shape it his way, and it's going to be interesting how that plays out. I think the team itself is not going to be a playoff team this year. I think that's well understood by Jackson, but they've got to try and start to make some moves to get moving in that direction, and hopefully the draftees that he's brought in, as well as some of the free agency signings that were made prior to him coming in, will be enough to get the ball rolling, and hopefully we'll be back next year. I think they'll have a high pick again. We'll be back next year talking about how they've built the foundations this year, kind of move into next year to get the real elite talent that they probably do need. Thank you so much, Jackson, for sending that in. That's really interesting to hear what the Chiefs' view is and how they've been going. Let's move on. We have another one. Of course, we wouldn't be talking about the RFL. We wouldn't be talking about a team. Of course, our commissioner Rasmus sent in his views with the Vikings. Here is what he had to say on sort of the Vikings' view so far. So for the Vikings, they drafted Duper in '82, but it felt weird having Duper on my team and not having him with Mourinho. I was trying to trade over to Miami, but could not make it work. I was trying to get Carter to reunite him with Wade Wilson. Also was looking to help add depth to my defence with a round 2 pick. When Miami traded all their picks, his plan fell through, and finding that Carter was still available with the Bills pick, he made the trade with you. But then it went cheap, going with the later second round pick instead of mid round, as they wanted more for that spot. I was happy with Carter, but by the time it was my pick in round 2, all the defensive targets were taking, with the Pats picking up the last player on his list 1 pick before him. I was between nostalgia and picking the best player, which is interesting. I mean, I think that's something a lot of GMs will be thinking about. It was unfortunate he went with his nostalgia and reaching for Ron Brown, but it did not go well. Perhaps he will not be a good in training. He will have to have a good training camp. He says, I need a full wide receiver, so he should be able to fill that role. Yeah, I mean, the Vikings, interesting, right? Because they a team that was obviously not at the top end of the draft. So it's a completely different view on how things have played out. And I think what's fascinating about that one, Wobbegong, really is, how it sounds like Ras was grasping with the perspective of trying to make things happen historically with some players, or going for players that he has a history with, has a view of maybe through his, how it played out in real life for some of the players that he used to follow. Looks like he went that way and maybe didn't quite pan out as exactly how he wanted it to.
Yeah, he went into the draft without a first-round pick. I think 2 years ago he traded it away. There was also a trade with me, so I gave up my first rounder this year to receive it, or in '81 I gave up my first rounder to receive it in '83. He drafted Wade Wilson at 26 2 years ago, who is now an 89 overall quarterback. So perfect selection 2 years ago from him. So he might not be too mad going into this draft without this first round pick, since it was well spent. But yeah, we had conversations when the draft went into the 20s. And yeah, at 28, that was my pick. And also from my point of view, I would have taken Anthony Carter, so that would have been my selection. So the choice was drafting for Mark Duper. He suggested a trade. I thought I really liked it. Duper is or could be a really good addition to my wide receiver core, since I plan to trade away Alfred Jenkins, who has been an awesome player for me, but I could not retain him, so I needed to trade him away. So wide receiver was my second highest target for this draft. So the choice was rather Anthony Carter or Mark Duper. I decided to go with the player I thought would be better, and Mark Duper. Anthony Carter is way closer to him than I thought. Normally, I really like win-win trades when both GMs like their end of the deal and think they received something really, really great. And I think this is one of the instances where both GMs have their reservations about the trade. I agreed in the end to do the trade because I thought, well, nice story to get Anthony Carter to the Minnesota Vikings, and I'd be fine with Mark Duper as well. So yeah, in the end, Anthony Carter could be the better player because of his salary cap. He's way cheaper than Mark Duper, although Mark Duper would be more of a deep threat, whereas Anthony Carter is more the possession wide receiver, and I wanted to have a deep threat. So yeah, for the Vikings, a little bit unfortunate with the second round pick, but I think in the first round, they got the better end of our deal. Drafting Anthony Carter was a good choice. I think he should be a very, very good wide receiver. In my opinion, Henry Allard is the best wide receiver in the draft, but right after that, you could talk about Anthony Carter at 28, maybe also over Mark Clayton, who was a top 11 pick. So that's the kind of situation we're talking about. The Vikings have to be very happy with Carter. In the end, we could have switch second rounders. I think for the Vikings, it would have been better to have the higher second rounder. And for me, it would have been the same. I pretty much did a very bad selection at 2 or in my second round. I think I would have gotten the same player also at 225. So yeah, maybe I should have accepted the other deal and it would be a little bit more win-win for both of us. But yeah, that's what we have to deal with. The Vikings have a good wide receiver 1 in Anthony Carter, or actually wide receiver 2 when you look at their roster. They still have Sammy White, who's really, really good. But yeah, the second round selection, of course, not the best.
Yeah, I mean the second round was a atrocious pick. I think Ras won't mind me saying that one. But I think that's the joy of a multiplayer league, right? Is that sometimes you just want to pick a guy for a name, right? You just want him because you've grown up with him, or you've just got this memory that you've had a fantastic experience that he did something, or he said something, or culture that came around with that player means that I just want him on my team to be a locker room guy, right? So I can see why GMs will do those things, and it's very, very hard sometimes when you're in a multiplayer league and you're trying to win to kind of not go with what you think and go with the guy that you want for nostalgia purposes. I'm sure Ron Brown will be a fine wide receiver too, right? I don't think there'll be a necessary problem with that. He's not the greatest, but he's certainly not the worst. He's not going to be, he's not going to be, guy who's going to be immediately go to the practice squad, for example. We could have a good training camp. You could always throw some training camp points his way and kind of hope that he progresses. The other side of the deal, I think, as you sort of mentioned, the duper sort of Carter signed deal that really happened now. I think that it's both got a good end of the stick with either, really. I think can't argue between them, to be honest with you. I think the Vikings are still in good shape going into the season. They've got a nice receiving core. They've got an elite quarterback, and they're going to do fantastically well in the NFC, I'm sure, again this year. So, yeah, really interesting to get to a view of a team that didn't have that first round pick down the bottom end, kind of maybe came in for a guy, and that nostalgia element is really, really an interesting sort of view on the draft itself. Let's jump over to the final GM that sent something in for us, which was the San Francisco 49ers GM. Again, a new GM, so thank you very much, Simon, for putting this together for us. So he was, again, sort of up the top end of the draft, and here's what he had to say in terms of his pick and his view in terms of how things played out. So he said, with the first round pick in number 7, he managed to get Ellard, which in his opinion is the best receiver in the draft. The 49ers had a huge black hole in the receiver position, which is now somewhat better, although they'll need some more depth at wide receiver in the future. But the wide receiver should add help to his quarterback, who had a solid season last year, so the plan is to stay with him this year and see how he progresses. With the second round pick, he picked up Bortz, who is a good guard, which again will improve the run blocking, pass protection, and hopefully assisting in giving the quarterback more time to find receivers, and also helping the running back gain more yardage. Round 3 was a little bit more difficult, is in a direct pick from the list, so he spent a lot of time trying to scout and decide, and actually got his first choice in Grimes, who's a centre. The position will need looking at in a couple of seasons or so to see if Grimes can make the step up to develop as a starter. Alone in these 3 drafts, he's improved his squad immensely. Both Ellard and Bortz will be starters in the coming season. So, I mean, yeah, we talked a bit about Ellard in terms of the Vikings and sort of the best receiver available, but I kind of agree with him, Wobbegong, that Ellard was the best wide receiver available, and getting him at pick 7 is a fantastic bargain.
And in our draft preview, we talked about, are the 49ers a team that might be aggressive under a new GM to try to trade up for a quarterback? Are they maybe going edge? We also talked about wide receiver as a possibility. I wonder if they would have taken Dent if he had been available. The Dolphins just picked him one spot ahead, but Allard, perfect selection for them. And also, if you look at the whole strategy, drafting your wide receiver 1, and of course, they did not have the best wide receiver core, but now Walker Gillette, who comes in at an 80 overall, who has been the wide receiver 1 last year. He's 36 years old. Now he only has to be wide receiver 2. I think that's perfect. And investing after that in your O-line, Mark Bortz on guard, perfect player for them. I think with his 83 overall, 84 strength, who should be a force at the interior O-line, also together with the rookie center they drafted. So if you look at their first 3 picks, it has been wide receiver 1, guard, center. And that's the perfect situation to evaluate your quarterback. They have 2 fairly young ones in Eric Hipple and also Mark Wilson. They are at a 76 and 80 overall. And Eric Hipple has been the starter last season under the old GM. So now you have the perfect position to evaluate your quarterback with a good weapon on wide receiver, with a solid O-line. And if he's good this season, yeah, there's no need to invest in another quarterback. He's on a 7-year deal with 50,000 salary, so that's a bargain. If he's your starter at quarterback for multiple years, I think that's perfect. And as I said in our very first podcast, you maybe don't need an elite quarterback. So the 49ers are doing their best to evaluate the situation, maybe drafting another quarterback in the future. But for now, they're in a really good situation to evaluate Eric Hipple, or maybe also Mark Wilson if they decide to start him. I would think it could be Eric Hipple, but yeah, really, really good choice. And yeah, as said earlier, I think Henry Allard is the best wide receiver in the draft. He looks awesome. It's a perfect pick for them.
Yeah, I similar to you. I like the Eric. I like the pickup in terms of Ellard. I also like Boritz. I think that's a great deal in terms of second round pick. I think he's going to develop into a very good guard in this league. I'm very hesitant to say that those 2 quarterbacks are going to be good enough to kind of make this team move up from being a non-playoff team to kind of being a competitive playoff team. I can't see, unless Hipple makes real massive progression gains. Bear in mind he's already 25. Or Wilson's also has a renaissance in terms of developing his position skill. I think that there's going to be a lot that's required in terms of trying to get this team going forward in terms of those 2 quarterbacks. I think we're going to probably be looking at this team next year at the top end of the draft, in my opinion, drafting a quarterback. Or they could be looking to trade for one in the season if one of a decent agent sort of value becomes available. That's how I kind of see the 49ers playing out. But yeah, I think in terms of what Simon's come in and done, what he's brought in and sort of drafted, I kind of like all the draft picks. I don't have a problem with anything he's picked up. I think they were sensible positions to make. I will go back to kind of the discussion we had in the last episode, which was maybe they should have thought about stepping themselves up. I think maybe Ken O'Brien could have been an interesting pick for them as well if they'd have drafted down, given that he sort of fell down to sort of pick 13. I think he could have been an interesting one for them to kind of bring in, because I think there's arguments to be said that they could have probably drafted down from 7 to 13, probably got some picks, and maybe just brought in Ken O'Brien. Obviously, it leaves the receiver issue, but there were some other receivers later on in the draft that probably not at Ellard standards, but probably good enough to kind of add additional quality to that 49ers roster. So yeah, I think I like the picks. Maybe if I'd been a bit more adventurous and a bit more critical, they could have done something to maybe solve that quarterback position, in my opinion. But interesting to hear that Simon is going to give them a run at quarterback and see how it plays out, which I think is fair given that some of the stats that he put in last year, in the sense of Hipple was pretty solid, right? It was 118 rating, 62% completion percentage. He put up okay numbers, 3,000 odd yards. It looked pretty solid. So I can understand why he's going to continue and give him a shot this year.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work out, you at least have your O-line, you have your wide receiver 1 for the new quarterback that might come in. So I like the strategy behind that. Of course, Ken O'Brien is a very fair point. That could have been the other option, but yeah, it could have also been trading everything to get to 2nd overall, and then you have a quarterback, but no one else to throw to, or that's gonna protect on Elway. So I like the strategy behind that, seeing how the first season goes, and then re-evaluating the quarterback position again, and maybe drafting a new one, but then the rookie quarterback has a 2nd year, Henry Allard, so perfect situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that one. So that kind of rounds out our team view. So thank you once again for everyone for sending in those messages and and views, and really interesting to get your sense of where you're going with your teams, and give us something to talk about in terms of your teams and what we think of them. So let's bring the episode to a close. But before we do, I think it's worth us, Wobbegong, just doing a bit of a quick fire in terms of maybe we'll do round 1, round 2, round 3. Who we think the maybe the best selection was, who we think maybe the worst selection was for each round, and reasons why. So, shall we start with round 1? What was your best pickup in terms of round 1, and sort of your least favourite pickup?
Of course, lots of good picks, especially when you look at the top 10. But that's why I wanted to take someone outside of the top 10. We could, of course, talk about Ken O'Brien, really good quarterback at 13. But one player I think that might be very, very much underrated is Joey Browner, strong safety, pick 118 from the Houston Oilers. He's an 84 overall strong safety with 79 agility, 82 speed. And something that maybe most GM don't know, he's already the 5th best strong safety in the league. We don't have too many good strong safeties in the league. So getting someone at pick 18, that's just awesome. I think Joey Browner, also with the box safety trade, should be a very good addition to our already really good Houston Oilers defense and also team in general. So that was one pick I needed to highlight. Perfect selection at the middle of round 1.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think fantastic pickup. So, who was your sort of least favourite pick in the first round?
I struggled just with the pick after Joey Browner, the San Diego Chargers to Jim Jeffcoat, defensive end. Not only was he not the best defensive end on the board, I was 2 picks behind that at 21. I had Greg Townsend on my list, or at the highest of my list for the whole draft. A realistic list, to put it that way. And I was really afraid that someone is going to take him. So when I saw the Chargers took defensive end, I was surprised that it is not Townsend. And the Chargers we talked about as a team that has many open roster spots. So good choice for them to trade down from the 4th overall pick to get additional first rounders, additional picks. I think defensive end is a good choice, but they also need O-line. And if you look at the picks that went after that, I think they could have taken a way better player than Jim Jeffcoat. He should be a decent player for sure, but that was one pick where I thought maybe there was a better selection available at 90.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think there's some better options available in that position, certainly, and I think some better players all round who maybe could have gone in that pick slot. So my kind of 2 favourites should be no surprise to anyone who's watched the first bit of the podcast today. Carl Mecklenburg at pick 9. I really like him. I think he was one that I tried to get back into the draft to try and acquire, for obviously reasons I mentioned earlier. I think he's a great pickup for the Browns. I think he's going to be one of the best linebackers in the league from day one. Amazing speed, tackling, his intelligence, strength. He can pretty much play any linebacker role you kind of want. I really like the fact that he's a hybrid pass rusher as well, so he's got a good trait in there coming in. So I think he's going to be fantastic for the Browns. And then my pick that I think would say is maybe the questionable one is Roger Craig, the running back who's gone for the Seattle Seahawks. And it's not necessarily because Roger Craig is a terrible player or there's better players available or anything like that. I think it's just I question necessarily taking a running back at 12th overall when it's not Dickerson, who is the standout sort of running back in the draft. When there are other sort of options available, and given that the running back position in the league is generally quite deep, even looking at free agency and everything, I think maybe there's an option there. They could have gone somewhere else. I mean, if you look at the Seahawks in particular, they already have an elite running back in Benny Malone. So interesting decision that they decided to double up the running back position rather than maybe look at other roles and other needs, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. So I personally like Roger Craig. That was also someone on my list for end of round 1 to get maybe a second running back, potential starter in the future. So I was surprised to see him go at 12th overall. But yeah, of course, there are always, in hindsight, other picks to make. Roger Craig should be an awesome running back, maybe a few spots too high.
Yeah. So let's move on to the second round then. I'm going to crack on with this one and give you my two, and then we'll get your two. So I think my kind of favourite pick in terms of second round again was the Browns. So Browns GM, if you're listening, you've done a fantastic job because I picked two of my favourite picks as your players. So I really like Bartos. Again, a player who I tried to get back into the draft to kind of acquire. I like him. He's one-dimensional at the moment in terms of his run blocking. That pass blocking is something that needs to be improved, but I liked his strength. I like the fact that he's got everything I kind of would want in terms of a solid centre. Interesting as well. I didn't know this when I was doing scouting, but interesting that he also has some ability in tackle, so he might be more versatile than anticipated, which is interesting. So I really like that pickup from the Browns. And then my least favourite pick probably was Jim Mills in terms of Kansas City. So we talked a lot about Kansas earlier, and we kind of held fire on talking a bit about Jim Mills, but I think there were probably other prospects available that were sort of better placed for the Chiefs, in particular, even just the tackle position. If you look at the likes of Dave Lutz, sort of a better pickup in my opinion. So maybe they missed a step there in terms of bringing in Jim Mills ahead of other players that are available quite high up in the second round.
Favorite pick of the second round by far is Bobby Hayward, quarterback, Detroit Lions. Of course, we could also talk about Dave Lutz, 84 overall, St. Louis Cardinals. So awesome tackle, but I like the quarterback selection. And for that story to unfold, I mean, he's an 80 overall quarterback, really good, 79 arm, 81 intelligence, 80 accuracy, so very well rounded. But you have to look at round one. The Lions picked 11th overall, and they did a trade with the Miami Dolphins, so they could have had Ken O'Brien at 88 overall at pick 11. Instead, they traded this pick to get Ned Moore, 90 overall wide receiver, Don Masek, 79 overall center, and John Dutton, 84 overall defensive tackle for that pick. And use that to get a starting wide receiver, an elite wide receiver, maybe the best in the league, starting center, and really, really good defensive tackle. Also, in addition to that, 2 second rounders and a third rounder. And then you draft your quarterback in round 2. I think they got better, really, really good. And I prefer that option instead of just taking Ken O'Brien in the first round and then maybe another player in the second round. So they got the fourth best quarterback in round 2. I was surprised that no one else took a quarterback in between, but most teams already had their quarterback. So great process by the Detroit Lions, and that's why I love the pick so much. And yeah, my worst pick is actually a position group, wide receivers. Mike Jones went third pick in the second round, Green Bay Packers, 65 overall. And then we have at 216, Mervyn Fernandez, Denver Broncos, 63 overall. And the pick we already talked about, Ron Brown, Minnesota Vikings, 225. There was a big drop off when you compare the second round wide receivers with the first round wide receivers. And in the third round, there were wide receivers also in the fourth round that were as good as those wide receivers or better. In the fourth round, Dennis McKinnon, Jets pick at 410, comes in with a 70 overall. So, of course, then when there's a fourth round wide receiver better than the third pick in the second round, that's a reach. So wide receivers were worse than expected. I also liked the pick from the Packers, Mike Jones, or the player in general. I had him high on my scouting, but I guess not only my scouts were wrong. Wide receiver in round 2, my worst selection.
Yeah, it's really interesting the wide receiver group being pulled as a least favourite picks in the second round. Do you think that's a case of people overestimating the scouting, or do you think it's a case of maybe there was a correlation in terms of maybe they maybe there was a sort of an overhype of the receiver call based on what we saw in the first round?
Maybe that, if you look at Willie Gold and Anthony Carter, end of round 1, so the run of wide receivers already started. So then if you wanted to have a wide receiver, I guess both Gold and Carter were projected to be second or second to third round pick, and they went first round. So maybe some teams overdrafted the next best wide receiver. I don't know if it's a scouting thing. I think we all need to do our learnings with scouting in the new game. Maybe it was because of the great wide receivers in round one, but still, not every pick can hit for sure. And if I would have had a second round pick and not a wide receiver, I would have maybe also taken one and reached for that player. In the end, we knew better about this wide receiver draft or rookie class, which was very top heavy, great players in round one. But after that, big drop off with some gems, as said, in the later rounds.
Interesting reflection, and I think, fair to say we're all still learning with this game. It's only been out a matter of weeks, and I think we're the first multiplayer league to go through the draft and scouting system with this one. So lots of learning to be taken away with this one. So what about round 3? What were was your favourite pick and your least favourite pick in that round?
Maybe let's start with my least favorite pick to end up with positive selection. I mentioned the Lions as a good process in round 1 or 2. In round 3, of course, their linebacker selection in Kiki De Ayala was not the best one, 62 overall. 71 tackling is, of course, great. But other than that, I think he might not make the roster. Also worth noting that in this draft, we have very, very high rookie salaries. So if you have a 62 overall player, that's on a yearly salary of 47K. That's, of course, a lot. And of course, unfortunate selection. But round 3, that's just the case. So no critics here. It's normal to just reach for players and maybe get not the best selections. The player I really, really liked was Danny Walters, St. Louis Cardinals at pick 19 in the third round, 64 overall. So on first side, you're thinking, well, not the best overall, but he comes in with 75 agility, 77 speed, which is really good in my opinion for a third round cornerback. And also why I want to highlight this pick is he has the shutdown corner trait. I don't know how much it actually does in the game. But I think it could be very valuable. I had a third round cornerback myself with the shutdown corner trade who needed to start last season in the playoffs because of injuries. His rating is also in the 60s. So maybe Danny Walters could be a gem for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yeah, interesting. Danny Walters is definitely a prospect. I think they might throw into the sort of the training camp mix and get some of his ratings up, because with that trait, as you said, we don't really exactly know how effective or not effective it is, but it must do something, right? There's been a lot of talk about shutdown corner traits and how valuable they are, and who knows? But I think certainly if you've got it, you've got to try and maximise it to the best of its ability. So I think my least favourite pick in the third round was John Tice to the Redskins. So we talked about the Redskins having a pretty good draft. I think it's fair to say the tight ends in this draft so far have not panned out how we would probably expect them to. John Tice looks like another guy who might not necessarily make the roster, or he might end up being like a third tight end in the league. He's not got anything really that attribute-wise that makes him stand out as a tight end. Interesting, he can play quite a chunk of wide receiver, but again, he's not going to make the wide receiver mark with his abilities. I mean, 60 in pretty much everything. His run blocking might be the thing that saves him, but his strength is still pretty low in my opinion. So yeah, I think he might be a question mark as to whether he stays around for a long time. And then my favourite pick in terms of finishing up, it was Dan Fike. I really like the Dan Fike pick to the Los Angeles Rams. He's pretty decent across the board in terms of both sides of sort of the blocking capability you'd want. I can see him sort of developing over time to be a pretty serviceable guard in the league, and I quite like his size and weight as well, which is going to help him. So I think he was quite a nice little pickup for the Los Angeles Rams. And yeah, that kind of brings us to a conclusion in terms of our episode today, in terms of drafts, the chaos at the top, the teams, and some of the players that we liked, and say we think maybe need a bit of a review after the first 3 rounds. But Wobbegong, before we finish up, anything else you would like to go through? Any other players, picks, any other things on your reflections? Now I think we're sort of nearly in round 5 now, but we've covered sort of the first 3 rounds here today.
I think we covered everything we wanted to talk about, most picks, and of course we could not mention every pick that we have are in the first round. Of course, really great selections, great strategies. So we focused on the teams that sent something in. But as always, feel free to reach out to us if you want to talk about your team, your off-season strategy, and maybe also previewing about the next season. So if there's anything you want to talk about, you're always welcome on the show. That's something we especially want to highlight at the end. But I think with the draft, we did our best to round it up a little bit. Very exciting season ahead with awesome rookies. So there can be lots of shakeups, lots of new division winners. Will be interesting to see who's going to win the Super Bowl next year.